This is not just history, this is identity, the continental bloodline, how Africa stand together and broke the chains of apartheid in the South. Right now, a powerful narrative is resurfacing across Africa, a story that completely changes how we understand the fall of apartheid, not just a South African victory, but as a full-blown continental operation powered by sacrifice, strategy, and solidarity. We are talking about the hidden roles played by countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Zambia, Tanzania, and other African countries that gave everything, money, lives, and stability to bring down one of the most brutal systems in modern history. And today, we are breaking it down like never before. Kai, no, wait first. You mean to tell me this man, Nelson Mandela, was in Ethiopia, carrying a fake passport, training like a soldier? This one pass waiting they teach us for school. Oh. Because while the Western countries, including the US, label him a terrorist, Africa was already preparing him as a freedom fighter. So here is the reality. We are stepping into the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This was the era of frontline states, where countries like Nigeria funded the struggle, Tanzania hosted liberation movement, and Zambia became the operational base of resistance. This wasn't just talk, this was action. But before we go further, take a second to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notification so you won't miss important political updates and the latest gist shaping our continent. Thanks for your support. Now let's get into it. Nigeria, the billion-dollar backbone, $61 billion. Ah, this is not assistance again. This is generational sacrifice. Nigeria didn't just support, we funded resistance. Civil servants paid Mandela Tax. We boycotted global events. We even pressure international powers economically. This wasn't sympathy, this was commitment. Right after independence in 1960, Nigeria didn't waste time. From day one, Nigeria positioned itself against apartheid. This wasn't a country that said, let's fix ourselves first. No, Nigeria said, your fight is our fight. That decision alone set the tone for the next 3 decades. 1963 to 1970, diplomatic pressure begins. Nigeria started using its voice globally at the UN, Commonwealth, and African platform to isolate the apartheid regime. Even during the Nigerian Civil War, 1967 to 1970, when the country itself was bleeding, support for Southern Africa didn't stop. Think about that. Fighting a war at home, yet still funding liberation abroad. In 1976, this is where it gets serious. Under General Olusegun Obasanjo, Nigeria introduced what people call the Mandela Tax. Civil servants had about 2% of their salaries deducted. That money went directly into supporting liberation movement like the ANC. Let that sink in. Ordinary Nigerians were personally funding the freedom of another country, not government alone, the people themselves. Nigeria led a massive African boycott of the 1976 Olympics because New Zealand had sporting ties with apartheid South Africa. Over 20 African countries follow Nigerian lead. This was Africa saying, if you play with oppression, you don't play with us. That move shook the global sports system. Late 1970s was economic warfare. Nigeria didn't stop at protests. We went on economics. Nigeria nationalized British petroleum assets in protest of the UK's soft stance on apartheid. That is billions on the line just to force change. This wasn't diplomacy. This was pressure. In 1980s, big financial and military support. This is where the numbers exploded. Nigeria became one of the largest funder of the ANC. Training support, logistics, scholarship for South African exiles. direct financial contribution. Nigeria wasn't just supporting, we were sustaining the struggle. In 1990, when Nelson Mandela was finally released after 27 years in prison, one of his major international visits was to Nigeria. Why? Because Nigeria wasn't just an ally, Nigeria was a backbone. No Ethiopia, no global Mandela. When they say no Ethiopia, no global Nelson Mandela, this is what it means. Simple, but let's break it down properly. Because this part of the story is bigger than what most people realize. In 1962, Mandela secretly left South Africa. At that time, the apartheid government had already branded him a criminal. Moving across border as himself was impossible. So what happened? He entered Ethiopia under a false identity, David Mosamaye. This was not just disguise, this was strategy. Because once you erase your identity, you gain movement, and movement is power. Mandela didn't go there to hide, he went there to transform. In 1962, he trained at the Cove Military Center in Addis Ababa under the support of Haile Selassie. Let that sink in. A future president learning military tactics, weapons handling, and guerrilla strategy. This is where Mandela evolved from activist to resistance strategist. The passport that changed everything. Now here is the real game changer. Ethiopia didn't just train him, they legitimized him. With that Ethiopian-backed identity, Mandela traveled across Africa and beyond. He met leaders, secured funding, built diplomatic alliance, positioned the ANC as the global liberation movement. Without that passport, Mandela would have remained trapped locally. With it, he becomes international. This wasn't just about helping one man. This was Africa saying, we will protect our own, even if the world rejects them. At that time, many Western governments labeled Mandela a terrorist. But Ethiopia, they saw a freedom fighter. That difference in perspective is what changed the trajectory of the struggle. Think about it like this. South Africa tried to limit Mandela physically. Ethiopia expanded him geopolitically. They turned him from a haunted man into a continental figure, a local activist into a global symbol. That is not just support, that is repositioning. So when people talk about Mandela's global influence, they often forget where the transformation truly began. It began in Ethiopia in 1962. That moment didn't just help Mandela escape, it helped him scale. And once he scaled, apartheid was no longer just a South African issue. It became a global fight Africa could not ignore. Zambia and Tanzania, they were engines. These countries, they were not just supporters, they were targets. This wasn't diplomacy, it was frontline warfare carried out from inside their own borders. After the Sharpeville massacre, the liberation struggle shifted from peaceful protest to armed resistance. By 1964, newly independent Zambia under Kenneth Kaunda opened its door to the ANC. Tanzania, led by Julius Nyerere, became the ideological and operational hub for liberation movements across Southern Africa. This is where everything changed. The ANC set up an external headquarters in Lusaka, Zambia. The PAC, Pan-Africanist Congress, operated heavily from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. These were not offices, these were command centers. Both countries hosted camps for Ukonto Wisiwe. In Tanzania, camps like Kongwa trained fighters not just from South Africa, but from across the continent. In Zambia, camps near Lusaka along border regions become staging ground for operations into apartheid South Africa. This means one thing: Zambia and Tanzania were now active participants in a war against the apartheid regime. Radio freedom, 1970s to 1980s. From bases in both countries, the ANC launched Radio Freedom. broadcasting into South Africa, mobilizing resistance, breaking apartheid propaganda. This wasn't just communication, it was psychological warfare. Because of their roles, both countries became direct targets of the South African Defence Force. 1979 to 1987, multiple cross-border raids by South African forces. 1986 was a major bombing of ANC facilities in Lusaka, constant assassination and sabotage operations. While less directly bombed than Zambia, Tanzania faced economic strength. Economic strength from hosting liberation movement. Military threat from apartheid-backed destabilization campaigns. Regional wars linked to liberation support. So let's be clear, this support came at a brutal price. Infrastructure destroyed, economic hardship, civilians caught in crossfire, leaders constantly under threat. Countries like Zambia became so vulnerable that their capital, Lusaka, was particularly a war zone for intelligent operations. This wasn't just charity, this was calculated sacrifice. This wasn't just charity, this was calculated sacrifice. Zambia and Tanzania understood something powerful. If apartheid survived in South Africa, it would destabilize the entire region. So, they choose resistance, even when it means becoming target themselves. But here is the bigger story nobody is talking about. Why will struggling African nation pour resources into another country's freedom? Because they understood something powerful. Freedom is not local, it's connected. As long as operation existed in South Africa, it was a threat to the entire continent. That mindset, that unity, we don't see it like that anymore. This history is not just a story, it's a mirror. It shows us what Africa can achieve when we move as one. But it also raises uncomfortable questions. If so much was sacrificed, why does it feel like that unity is gone today? Why are we divided over things that are smaller than what once brought us together? Now some people will argue, Africa should have focused on itself first. And yes, that argument exists. But here is the counter-argument. If apartheid has expanded, it wouldn't stop at South Africa. It will spread. So what Africa did wasn't charity. It was self-defense. Like trying to stop fire before it burns your own house. In my opinion, honestly, this one hit differently. Because when you hear the numbers, the sacrifice, the risks, it's impossible not to feel proud. But at the same time, there is pain. Because the unity that once defined Africa now feels distant. We have gone from collective struggle to individual survival. Apartheid didn't just fall because of internal pressure. It falls because Africa made it impossible to sustain. That is the truth. So now the real question is, can we get back to that level of unity again? Do you know about the Mandela Tax? Why do you think this history isn't widely taught? And what will it take for Africa to move as one again? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. Don't just watch, engage, like, share and subscribe. Stay informed. See you on the next one. Peace.